Hello, everyone, and welcome to the For the Sake of Search. It has been a little while since we have recorded, and I'm super excited about this new segment that we're going to be starting. Today, I have with me Tito Sierra, Director of Product Management at Yahoo, and a man who I owe a lot of thanks to, actually, because a lot of what I have learned about product has come from a 30-minute conversation I had with him a while back, and that has pivotally changed my career. So I'm so thankful. Tito, do you mind just telling a little more about yourself?
Sure. First, thanks for having me on your podcast. Yeah, a little bit about myself. I'll start by saying I'm a search nerd. I've been working on search products and working on search engines for a little bit over 20 years. And for the last, I believe it's about 12 or 13 years, I specialized as a product manager for search products. So I really I got bit by the search bug, if you will, and haven't looked back since. And I have to say, given how things have been evolving in the last few years with generative AI entering the picture, it's continues to be a really exciting space to work in. And especially as a product manager, there's just so many new opportunities opening up to deliver new kinds of experiences for users. So I've been a product manager on a variety of different types of search products over the years. I started off in academic search products, did a little bit of medical search, moved over to legal research search, worked on one of the largest legal search engines in the world. That was a really interesting assignment, very tricky domain to optimize search for. Also worked on enterprise search and consumer search. Specifically, I was a product manager at Mozilla working on the Firefox browser, where I worked on search engine integrations and auto-suggest in Firefox. And now I'm working at Yahoo. My role at Yahoo is I'm the product manager for query understanding and whole page optimization. So what that means is the way I like to summarize it is query understanding is the very beginning of the search. So if somebody enters in a few keywords, my job is to, or I should say my team's job, is to apply a lot of models to try to predict what is it that the user's looking for, who are they referencing in their search, what is the specific intention that they have for their search, and then that information is passed down to the rest of the search engine to deliver really good search results. So I really that's my background in a nutshell. I really have been deep in a lot of different types of search experiences over the years, and I'll continue doing this until I retire.
That's awesome, actually. I totally vibe with that because, quite frankly, so much of my early career, I was very interested in search, and I felt like it was unapproachable for a long time. I was like, this is the big thing that PhDs go to solve. You go to Google to go and solve it, or Yahoo. And I think that was the thing. It was really intimidating getting into search. And you kind of mentioned something that I want to start diving into, right? You mentioned this idea of query understanding, and you kind of broke out actually really well what query understanding is. But how are some of the ways that, like, either at Yahoo or at different companies, you see query understanding being used, right?
Yeah. So query understanding, the simplest way to think about it is to infer what is the user trying to do with their search by looking at their actual query string, what they actually type in the search box, and also leveraging any other contextual signals you have about who they are and their particular context.
Yeah.
So a very sort of simplistic way of thinking about it is when the search engine, when the user types in the search box and they hit enter, then you have a critical piece of information, which is their search query, by which you can then try to take the first step to understand what it is that they're looking for.
Mm.
And this query understanding function, this is not something that you can just take a software library off the shelf and say, okay, here it is. This is the query understanding. Because every product context and every domain is different. So for example, I mentioned that I previously worked on legal search. Query understanding legal search is very, very different from, let's say, query understanding for e-commerce search. For legal search, uh, you pretty much have to leverage things like taxonomies to understand when somebody's entering a legal term. You have to recognize that it is a legal term, and you have to be
Mm.
able to understand, okay, now that you know that the user entered a query like res judicata, which is a legal term, you have to know, what does that mean?
Yeah.
And what is it that they're looking for when they search for res judicata? But if you're entering in, let's say, the query string is sort of a long alphanumeric code, but if you're on a site that sells products and they're entering in perhaps a SKU or product number of something like that, you want to recognize the pattern that they're entering in a product code, because then you want to do something with that. For example, go directly to the product page rather than giving them search results.
Mm.
In the case of web search engines like Yahoo, we have to handle so much, so many different kinds of queries. So for query understanding that we do at Yahoo, we apply a large number of different models to understand. At a high level, you can think about coarse-grained classification models, which sort of try to understand what is the general area that the user is interested in. So
Yeah.
for example, are they searching for a person? Are they doing a navigational query? Are they doing a shopping related query? And so that's a classification task. And with that classification, then you can then apply more query understanding to do fine-grained query understanding. So let's say, for example, someone does a search for um, reasons for Tesla stock increase.
Mm. Yeah.
Right? So that right there is giving you a lot of information. And what we would do in that case is we would identify, oh, this query based on our models seems to be a finance related query. And it seems to be
Uh,
mentioning a particular company, Tesla. And it seems like the intention is to understand how the stock has moved. And so just from that short keyword, you can apply a ton of query understanding to break that query down, and then use that to then determine how do you build a good set of search results for that. And users expect this.
yeah.
Users really expect that search engines are mind readers,
Mm.
and the query understanding part of search, which is just one part of many, is critical for the rest of the search to actually be good.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And actually, this is a perfect interjection point. So, I forgot to mention earlier that this series is being brought to us by Relevan, and I think this is one of the reasons why I'm looking to or why I'm founding Relevan, which is internet search has gotten so good that anytime someone goes onto a small like mom and pop type e-commerce shop, this they're just ruined. The user experience is not at that same level. And we've come to expect this level of like user understanding. I know exactly what the user wants and I'm going to direct them exactly there, the finance, Tesla, extracting all of these things. And now, so my question for you, kind of going into this, you mentioned models. Are these machine learning models? Are there still like, rule-based classifications out there? Like I think Doug mentions it in his search book. Yeah. What are you guys working on, and then what do you just see broadly across the industry?
So I've worked at many companies, and certainly the trend has been to move towards model-based processing for both query understanding, but also for matching, relevance, etc. Um, so we do use a lot of pre-trained machine learning models, where you basically need to compile a large number of queries, annotate them, and then train a model, a predictive model, so that when new queries come in, you can match the pattern and be able to sort of predict where, what the classification is, what the intentions are, what the entities are, etc. That said, not every company has research scientists to build models or ML
Right.
engineers to build models, and not all companies need that.
Mm.
So here I'm going to sort of draw on my experience in working in various different domains. And one thing that I've learned over the years is that every domain has a particular set of use cases that they need to optimize for. So if you're an enterprise search product specifically focused on helping people, let's say, find manufacturing equipment, that is this very specific specialized domain.
Mm.
And the type of searching that people are going to do on that site is going to be very different from the type of search that they do, let's say, on a Google or a Yahoo. So you really want to make sure that whatever solutions you're bringing to bear to make the search experience work well are adapted to your particular domain. So in some domains, you could have really great matching or query understanding based on a collection of keyword lists or
Mm.
regular expressions. And if your domain is fairly tight and you can build these things over time, you might be able to get away with that and not have to have large complex models. Model-based query understanding is really effective in terms of coverage to be able to
Mm.
get all those sort of nuanced permutations, what we sometimes call different surface forms of queries that users will throw at your search engine. But also building AI models to be very effective requires a lot of training data.
Yeah.
So not every company has all that training data. Not every company needs all that training data. So I've always been an advocate of a much more practical approach to optimizing search products, which is to really understand your users, really understand what are they trying to do with your search engine, and then how do you optimize your search engine specifically for that?
Mm.
And if you start from that, then the solution space becomes a bit clearer, because then you can look at what is the lowest cost solution that I could implement to reliably address this issue. And in some domains, it may turn out that you really need to build model-based solutions for that. But if you're a small or medium-sized organization, and if your domain is very specialized, that may be overkill. It may not be necessary to do that. So I guess I'll say that the answer of what's the best tool here really depends on your context. And you really need to start with understanding your users, their search use cases, and their behavior. Looking at search logs, this is so basic and fundamental.
Yeah.
Literally looking at, ideally in an de-identified way, protect privacy, but look at what is it that users are looking for? How are they searching? And if you do some of that, you can get a really good picture as to what is it that they're trying to do? What are their goals? And then you could build your solutions around that.
Yeah, I totally get that. And actually, I have a really recent example that I came across where, you know, um, a very simple solution could have fixed a really probably serious search problem where I was working with this guy who owns Mie Gallery. It's an art gallery for a specific domain of art. And one of the things I was walking through his search, and actually it was really kind of a good search experience. It, of course, was a Shopify site, and they've done a lot of work. But one of the things as I was walking him through his site, and this is a guy who's been doing e-commerce for a long time, like 20 years, and I typed in the artist's name and then original because I was
Mhm.
looking for an authentic, not a reproduction. Because in this art industry in particular, there are a lot of reprints that they do. And when I did that, only a handful of results came up. And he was like, I'm like, "Do you only have 12 originals?" He's like, "No, I have, dozens and dozens." And what we found out was, the word original was only in those 12.
Yep.
And again, this comes back to very simply, my recommendation to him was like, you don't need to solve this with, machine learning to determine what your range is original and what print and all of these things. I'm like, just go put original in the text for ones that are original. And it's just like a simple way to get in front of the users and say, oh, what are you actually searching for? So with that,
Well, if I may comment on
yeah,
that
yeah, let's hear
example,
it. Yeah,
yeah, it's an example where the user, every user has their own, let's say, search habit,
yeah,
and I think often users will add additional query terms to be able to help the search engine understand what they're looking for, but every person will do something different.
yeah,
Right. So in your case, you added the word original because it was intuitive to you that that would help you get to where you're going. But certainly the folks that are building the product descriptions may not have necessarily thought that that was an important piece of information. And so this is going back to my earlier comment about looking at your search logs.
yeah.
It's really important to understand what are the recurring patterns of how people are looking for your content so that you can then adapt your search engine to align better with those behaviors. So in
Mhm.
that case, certainly one solution would be to add the word original, let's say, to the title of the artwork. But it could also be, there's so many other solutions to that.
Yeah.
You could add original to, let's say, a hidden set of metadata fields for the
Yeah.
record so that you don't have to, let's say, pollute the titles with lots of these extraneous words. And so, but again, the key is that you can't necessarily anticipate in advance all the different variants of how people are going to search. So it's important to look at your logs to understand those patterns and then based on that, improve the search engine accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of like brings me into we're talking about a lot of different things like going into the search logs, understanding your users. All of these things, they take a lot of time. And, to your smaller e-commerce sites, mid-size e-commerce sites, they're like, "Oh, I don't have time and money to put into that." So let's talk about like measurement now. So why should people be doing this? Of course, at Yahoo, everybody knows Yahoo is a search company, so of course they need to spend money. But from your experience across the industry, like why are people measuring search and improving it? How do you measure the value that a better search experience adds?
Measurement is a bedrock foundation. If you don't have some basic way to understand what people are doing with your search engine and what the quality of that experience is, then any any investment in trying to make the search better, you won't be able to know whether or not you're getting a return on that investment.
Mm,
One of the patterns that I saw very early on in my career, working at companies that, let's say, had less of a mature stack in terms of search optimization, measurement, et cetera, was what I call the whack-a-mole problem. So
mm,
the whack-a-mole problem in search, which unfortunately a lot of companies still operate under, is where the implementation and the prioritization of improvements is based on sort of very specific problems reported by customers or users. And you go in, someone says, this search doesn't work well. And you go in and you say, yes, this doesn't work well because of this issue. Let's fix it. For example, someone said, I only found 12 original artworks.
yep.
So, you may get that anecdotal and you go in and then you go ahead and start adding original to the documents and you fix that issue, but it's possible in fixing that issue that you actually made a lot of other searches a little bit worse. And so measurement, having some kind of way of understanding how people are searching and what the quality of that search experience is really foundational. It's something that I've found in my career as a product manager, pretty much almost every new company that I've joined, particularly the ones where I joined a team that didn't previously had a product manager, one of the first things that I focused on was building up a measurement framework.
Mm.
And what I mean by measurement framework, I mean both offline measurement of search quality, but also online measurement in terms of analytics and engagement data. But it's really important to have some set of metrics in place to be able to understand what people are doing. Because if you go and invest time and money to make some improvements, for example, implement some new algorithm or do a complete UX overhaul of your search results page, if you don't have a way to measure the quality of that search experience, you'll have no idea whether or not the search changes you made actually benefited the users or even made a difference.
Mm.
I can share one anecdote from a company that I worked for. When I joined, the team had been consistently pushing out lots of search relevance changes for several years. But there was no search relevance measurement metric in place to track that over time. And what I found when I put in those measurements in place and looked at the backlog of engagement data, so it was a really great thing because I was able to define a metric and then be able to not only see the quality of search relevance going forward, but also see based on the prior historical data how it worked. And what I
Oh,
uncovered is
wow.
that a lot of the changes that they released actually made no difference. It didn't actually
Oh,
impact a
man.
lot of the engagement metrics. So measurement is important not only for assessing the quality of the changes, but also the impact of the changes. So that's another factor, is impact analysis is really important. So you have a hypothesis, oh, if I make this change, this should make search much better. And then if you actually have a measurement framework in place and you sort of test a version of that change and you have a way of isolating that within some kind of environment, you should be able to tell that, oh, wow, we made this change, but it actually only impacts less than 1% of queries.
Mm.
So is it worth doing? So measurement is really, really important. And the other thing is that it's really important to know what metrics to focus on. So this is another, I would say this is a lot of companies that operate search engines generally have some measurement framework in place. They may be using some off-the-shelf metrics, things that are not specific to their domain. But what I often find is lacking are specific metrics that are specific to their business or their particular type of product context. So often you see, especially, I know you're active in the Haystack conference, which I've been a member of that community, that search
Mm.
relevance conference community for quite a while. You often see people present about these sort of off-the-shelf metrics, NDCG, MRR, these sort of click-through rate, and those are good standard metrics to have. They're sort of baseline.
Yeah.
But if you're operating a social media site versus an e-commerce site versus an enterprise B2B site, from a business point of view, the metrics that matter are going to be very, very different. For a social
Mm.
media site, you care about engagement, you care about returning users, you care about time spent on site. And search can help all of that, but not all search changes affect those in the same way. E-commerce, you care about conversion, you care about adds to carts, you care about order size. And again, you can optimize search differently for those types of goals, depending on what your priority is from a business standpoint. And then on the enterprise B2B side, if the way your company makes money is through subscriptions, then improving engagement may not be that important. What you really want to do is improve satisfaction, or maybe you want to improve specific outcomes that your tool is actually super important for. So just to kind of summarize this point, it's good to have measurement, and it's
Yeah.
good to track, let's call it the fundamentals of search measurement, click-through
Yeah.
rate, NDCG, et cetera. But it's really important to figure out, how does your search product drive business value? Again, I'm wearing my product management
Yeah.
hat
Yeah.
here. This is not something that's often talked about at search conferences, but it's really important to really boil down why, how does improving your search experience improve business value? And you have to really understand, how does your product fit into the business context, and then figure out, well, then what is the right measures that you should be optimizing for? Again, are you optimizing for engagement, satisfaction, transactions? Those are key things to understand first.
Yeah, actually, now that you mention that, it's funny because I personally have held NDCG with a very, high regard. And for those who don't know, NDCG is just a way to measure the ordering of the results. It assumes there's some best ordering of search results and some right results that people are looking for. But in the case of something like the art site that I was mentioning earlier, a much more valuable metric would be actually diversity. Like, am I finding a diverse set of art, that matches my queries? And then, maybe I scroll for a bit. That's good. I'm trying to discover, and, sure, we want to make sure that the right art is kind of popping up. But there is a lot of value to being able to see lots of different art so that I'm exposed to a lot. And that's
Yeah,
not something that would show up in DCG.
yeah, I definitely, these sort of rank-oriented measures are important in contexts when you're really trying to optimize for having the best results at the top.
Mm,
But there are some use cases where it really doesn't matter what the ordering is. You really need to get the one best answer right. So
yeah.
if you're, let's say you're a doctor and you're using what are called practical guidance medical tool, like reference tool, then, and you're typing in the name of a condition, it, the fact that the fourth result was ordered, was more relevant than the fifth result doesn't matter. What matters is the first result.
Yeah.
That's what matters. That's the most important thing. But then also there are products where you're doing research, let's say news related research, and you want recall. Recall is really important. It's not about getting the first two results right. You need more than two. You need 8, 10. And so optimizing for a recall set is going to be more important in that context than optimizing for the top hit. I think, something that's happened is sort of the Google effect, where as consumers, uh, most people use generic web search engine like Google. We have a lot of users that use Yahoo as well. But you're used to this sort of pattern where you have one search box, you enter in a few words, and the vast majority of time you're clicking on the first hits, what's above the fold on your mobile phone or on your desktop. But not all other search domains work that way. And so I think in some ways we have overemphasized ranked based measures as the end all and be all of measuring search quality, and we shouldn't. We should really, it really ends up being very domain specific. So you have to understand, again, go back to the fundamentals. Who are your users? What are their search tasks that they're trying to accomplish, and how are they using your site now? Search engines. One thing I've learned over the years, over 20 years in search and about 13 years as a product manager, is that you can maybe nudge users to behave a little bit differently, but really the job is to adapt the search engine to the users. So that's really important. And to do that, you need to understand what's the right measure for success in their world, right?
Right.
Because a lawyer doing research for a case versus a consumer buying a product from an e-commerce site, those are very different use cases. So you would not expect the same measure to be useful for both.
Yeah. Actually, that's a really, interesting way to put it too. And I think the only way you can kind of get there is getting in front of your users, figuring out who they are, what they do. I loved the search logs, which I hope most companies collect in some way, shape, or form, such that they can go and read those. I can even say personally from my experience at GitHub, I have found so many patterns that I was just like, I had no idea that someone would ever want to do that on GitHub. But here we are, and you know what? We're going to make that pattern work well for you.
Now it's going to get even more interesting. I hope I'm not sidetracking this
No, go for it.
conversation. When a lot of the search traffic that search products currently serve are initiated by agents rather than humans. That's going to be an enormous pivot in terms of how we optimize search. Humans are lazy searchers. They tend to have very relatively short query strings. Agents, I would imagine, are going to be more specific and more specialized and throw a lot more context, which is great for search. But that's it's a whole other topic around how then do you optimize search engines for this sort of new growing class of users that are operating a bit independently and will not have the same attributes as a human searcher. So for example, a human searcher by reputation, and I can say that I've watched enough usability sessions with users to kind of confirm some generic patterns. But in general, users going to a website and typing in the search box, generally users are very lazy. They'll type in 2 words, 3 words, maybe 4 words. They will look at, the first 5 results on the search results list. And if they don't like what they see, or if they feel like the results are not aligned with what they were looking for, they'll just add another word or they'll change their query. They generally don't use filtering. They don't go to the next page. And if the second and the third, reformulation of the query doesn't work, then they'll abandon and you'll lose them forever. Right?
They'll go to a search engine.
But an agent search is not lazy. They can go do a search, collect the first 50 results, process all of them. So, this idea of understanding the users, I mentioned this, looking at search logs and things like that. But I expect that there's going to be again, not every company and every search product is going to be used by agents, but for the ones that are, things are going to change very significantly.
Yeah, no, I agree. And actually, I say even from GitHub, we have seen this a lot. And in some ways, it's been really good. It's like I want agents to be able to find things. In some ways, it's been really challenging because as I've seen some of the search logs from these agents, I'm like, these agents have no idea how GitHub search works. And that's really, it's challenging. It's a little frustrating at times because it's like, we'll say, for example, commit history. A lot of times these agents will come to GitHub and they'll go through the search through the commits. And what's indexed on commits is the commit message. But a lot of times these agents believe, because they know that commits contain code, that they can go and search for code too. And that's actually going to be a really interesting thing as we start to see this new world where agents are doing things. Is these agents have context that they believe to be true, but might not be reflected in reality in the search engine.
Yeah, they're going to definitely push the limits of trying to get as much information as possible. And the big question is, on those that are maintaining these search engines and these indexes, how much are they going to adapt to take advantage of that? And I think there's definitely a potential here of companies that are more adaptive to agents being winners because they're the ones that are actually returning back useful information. I anticipate this sort of idea of competition, where an agent will scatter their requests across many different sources and will continue to return to ones that seem to generate the signal that they're looking for. And
Mm.
so if you have operate a site where you're blocking the agent traffic, or you're accepting the agent traffic but not recognizing it as agent traffic and therefore not adapting your search engine to optimize for it, they may just go somewhere else. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time for search engine operators to think about how do they evolve their search experience to work in this new world of agents.
Yeah, and for those who might not be familiar with like internet or internet technology, this is like what Tito's talking about here is there are different ways that you can identify who is searching on your site. These come down to user agents, which is a piece of information that a web browser will send back when it's searching. And these are the things that I'm looking forward to see like how this plays out, because in a lot of cases, these agents are actually using browsers, but they're using very specific types of browsers that set a very specific type of user agent. So going back to your like query classification, that is something that you can add as metadata. Like, hey, this came from a source that we expect is an agent, and then we can treat that search differently. Rather than optimizing for the 3 to 4 word searches, we are building out a different query pattern on the back end that might better work with these agents.
I think it's going to be tricky with software agents in that surely there'll be some that are going to be, let's call them more commercially oriented, that self-identify as independent agents, if you will, that are more like web crawlers, right? Where they're really trying to solve some kind of problem on behalf of whoever's managing that agent. But I think the majority of the agent traffic that we'll see going forward is going to be on behalf of individual human users. So human users that have set up agents to do recurring searching or recurring tasks. And so going back to that kind of strategy, how do you know that it's a software agent? I don't think you will be able to tell based on looking at the quote user agent identifier from the traffic, because that user agent may be the user's IP address, or it may be they may be using a browser that has built-in agentic capabilities, and so
I
it'll
see.
look like an actual individual user, and it may be operating on behalf of an individual user. It's just that that individual user, rather than going to your site and typing in keywords, they've got an agent that's sort of spoofing them and going on dozens of sites and doing hundreds of searches, because that may be what they need to do to complete whatever task or research that they're trying to do. So it'll be very interesting to see how this plays out longer term. But I think we're going to see pretty much all of the above. We're going to see users continuing to search manually, if you will. You're going to see agents searching on behalf of individual users, and then you're going to see sort of standalone software agents that are doing it. That you'll be able to identify them, and then some of it will be surreptitious. Will be spoofing individual users when in fact they're doing it at large scale because they don't want to get blocked.
Yeah. No, it's going to be, we're entering some really strange times, which is both very exciting and terrifying at the same time. I want to wrap us back to, so we've been talking a lot about some really technical stuff. And what I want to ask you is, for the people out there who, maybe they're learning about search for the first time, or, they don't have resources to go out and hire a search engineer or a team of search engineers. How could they meaningfully start to improve search? Like, what do you think are some steps that they could take to just build up their search experience and start, again, understanding their users, aside from maybe just looking at query logs?
If it's a small or medium-sized business, or let's say like a solo entrepreneur type of situation, most often than not, they're going to be using some existing platform to manage their content, to manage their inventory. So for example, you had mentioned earlier Shopify. I actually have a Shopify site as well for a side business that I have, and they have a pretty good search.
Yeah.
But the key thing is, in any platform that you're using, it's important, if you're defining the content. So let's say that you have a Shopify site and you have your inventory of products. Um, Understanding sort of some best practices around how do you describe your products, how do you present them on your website, how do you expose your catalog to other discovery services so that people can find it through those platforms. It's important to really understand whatever platform you're using, whether it's Shopify, whether, let's say, you do a lot of work through Instagram or other platforms, TikTok. Really understand under the hood, how do you set up those experiences for success? What are the settings that you should look at? How should you be describing your products? If there are different templates available, what's the best template to present your content? These are really important things. But to answer your question, like, how do you get started? Really, honestly, especially if you're kind of a small or solo, get real human beings to go and try to use your site and watch them, watch what they do. That's how you capture those little nuances, like, the example that you had around, searching for original artwork.
Mm,
And again, in those platforms, if you have an ability to get analytics,
yeah.
really just take the time to learn how to dig into that, and really understand what is it that people are doing, what are the patterns. So you don't, if you're on the smaller side, you're not going to build your own search engine,
Right.
and you might not even install a sort of a large commercial search engine, or an open source, customize an open source search engine. You're probably going to be using some kind of platform. So, but just getting to the fundamentals of having people actually use it and give you feedback, just observe them, get friends and family to go and use it. And people, as users, on the user side, people are very opinionated.
Yeah.
They will give you feedback really quickly. And again, I go back to this concept of, you really need to understand your domain and your
Mm,
users. And I do believe that there are very common patterns in whatever it is that you're doing. And the key is to understand those patterns. And based on understanding those patterns, you can probably make some small tweaks to better align your search engine for how people are trying to search what you're trying to do.
yeah. No, I totally agree with that. Like, I think another really great example of this is like the, as people with businesses, a lot of times we know all the domain terms, so like in let's say aquariums, there's this abbreviation HOB, which is hang on back filter.
Mhm.
That's known in that domain, but not everyone has that same level of domain expertise, right? So if you over optimize on using your domain language, then someone out of domain might be like, oh, I just want, a filter that I can attach to a tank easily. So yeah, I agree with that. Just like getting into their head and saying, do they know these things or not?
Yeah, one other thing I want to mention that I don't think gets talked about enough is the search user experience. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is, oftentimes in the search world, in the tech side of the search world, we're very, very focused on algorithms. We're very focused on relevance ranking. We're very focused on recall. And we spent some time earlier talking about query understanding. And these are very important kind of technical components. But one thing that I've learned over the years is that the actual search user experience itself can be really impactful in terms of whether or not people have a good experience with your search product. So what do I mean by that? I mean the design of your search box. I mean if you have implemented auto suggest, the configuration
Mm,
of your auto suggest. I mean the layout of your search results page. I mean the metadata that you include on your search results page. You can have the best AI ML driven relevance ranking. But if you're only displaying titles and some obscure metadata, and you don't have images, and you don't have category labeling, or you don't have some other descriptive information, the user may not necessarily see the results as relevant, even though from an objective point of view, they're highly relevant. So kind of understanding what is it that, how do people interpret your search results? And also what's the intelligent configuration of your defaults? Again, a topic that's not discussed a lot, but it's actually, I found it as a product manager to be really fundamental. I'll give you an example. So let's say you're running a news site. I should mention that I previously worked at Dow Jones on their B2B news search portal. So we had millions of, our search index was growing by millions of articles a day.
Wow.
And so think about, in the context of searching for news, the default scope of your search is critical. Are you searching for content in the last week, in the last day, in the last 3 months, in the last year, or in the entire archive, right? So there was a thinking, oh, we should just search the entire archive. That's the best thing that people are looking for. But now, can you imagine trying to do optimal relevance ranking when somebody enters in a term like Ukraine war, and you're searching the full archive going back 20 years? It just doesn't make sense. And so things like, what's your default search range? What's your default sort order? Oftentimes you assume, okay, well, we should sort by relevance. Well, in some domains, actually, I'll give you an example. Amazon doesn't sort by relevance per se. They sort by optimizing for revenue, which is a mix. Oftentimes, like what's considered relevant, or oftentimes the default sort for a search engine ends up being a mix of multiple factors. And so those defaults, what's the default scope of the search? What's the default sort of the search? What filters do you apply for the search? These are all user experience configurations that can make or break your search experience. And relevance is important, but it sort of is something on top of those things. So simple things that people can do, especially if they're not doing a fully customized search engine, is looking at how many results should they show on the page? Can they configure what's included in the actual display of the search results, and figuring out like what's most important for the user? And if there's ability to configure those things, those are some ways to really make the search more aligned with what users are looking for.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. Actually, I saw this on an auction site recently where, it was something that I hadn't thought of before, but, every time I went onto that auction site, they popped the newest ones at the very top. And I was like, that's actually really handy, because 9 times out of 10, unless I had something I was actively bidding on, that is the thing that I wanted to see, is there something new on this site that I am interested in seeing, that kind of matches my intent. Oh, that's awesome. All right, so we're getting close towards our time. What are Well, actually, I'll just open up. Is there anything that you feel like people need to know, whether that's business owners and people getting into search? What is missing in the search industry that you feel like people need to know more about?
Well, one thing that I've learned over the years is that the user perceived quality of your search is based on your worst search, not your best search. So what I mean by that is, if people come to your site and they do a search to accomplish some task, and let's say they search your site 12 times a week, you could get 11 out of those 12 searches right. But if you get one wrong, that is going to create a doubt. And once that doubt enters the equation, they might be concerned, oh, maybe this site doesn't cover everything that I'm looking for, or maybe this is really bad. Like, why did they do that? And you can really erode a lot of trust. So I guess one thing that I kind of want to share is this concept of optimizing your search by really looking at your failures and correcting as many of your failures as possible. Um, it's really important in search to get the simple, common things right. I think sometimes, especially as new technology enters, it comes into play, for example, right now, generative AI summaries, things like that, there's so much emphasis on innovation,
Mm.
but for users trying to accomplish a task, you need to get the most common things that they're trying to do. The simple things need to work 100% of the time. So this is more of like a practical piece of advice, which is to first understand, how are people using your site? What are they trying to accomplish? And get the fundamentals right. Because if once you fail on that, it really erodes trust and you may never get those users back. So getting the fundamentals right. I'll share one anecdote on this. I'm a big film buff, and I have a subscription to this movie theater called Alamo Draft House. They're across the country. They're fantastic. I love Alamo Draft House. And their app, if you enter in the name of a movie, about 80% of the time it matches, but about 20% of the time it doesn't show up.
Mm.
I'm just saying, literally, nothing complicated, nothing that requires query understanding. Literally, the title of the film, typing in the title of the film, and 0 matches.
Wow.
I have no idea what's going on there, but that's an example of getting the basics right. If you're
Yeah.
going to a site where you're searching for movie tickets and you type in the first word of the name of the movie and you don't get the match, it just erodes your trust in that. And so it's important, again, to go in and look at the most popular queries. Most people that run a search engine have some access to the logs.
Yeah.
Sort them by frequency and literally go through those, type them in, and confirm that your search is working really well for those searches.
Yeah.
And I would guarantee you that if you go down that list, even if you go to the top 100, you'll probably find a handful in there where the search sucks.
Yeah.
And you need to figure out how to solve that ASAP, because especially if it's a very popular search, if you're failing at those, then you have a problem. And so to me, that would be my priority, is to get the most common searches working well first before trying to look at adding bells and whistles.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, and especially because, that costs money. They are losing revenue. When trust is eroded and when people, abandon or they go away, or they just don't find what they're looking for, that is real revenue that's being lost too, especially for e-commerce type sites. But at movies, same thing. It's like those are ticket sales, and better because you've been in search for a while. You're like, all right, well, I'm just going to try again. I'm going to try with different words. I'm going to try it a little bit longer. But not everybody is as likely to do that because
Most
you've been
most
spoiled.
people. So one thing that I learned from doing user research on search,
Yeah.
where you actually watch what people do and you ask them questions about it. So like
Mm.
interview-based research is one theme that I found across multiple companies, across multiple personas, from students to just regular consumers to lawyers to doctors. People trust search engines more than they should. So when they do a search and they don't find what they're looking for, they don't assume, they don't oftentimes don't assume that the search engine is broken or that it has a problem. Oftentimes they think it's not there.
Yeah.
And so if somebody's searching for, let's say, a product on your e-commerce site, and for whatever reason, they just phrased the query in a way that just didn't match the way you have it set up in your product, they'll say, oh, they don't have it. It's out of stock, or
Mm,
this site doesn't have this product. And so again, you may be losing that. So you lost that sale, but you're potentially losing a lot of future sales because they keep trying to look for this particular type of product. They don't seem to carry it, so they'll go elsewhere, right?
yeah.
So it's really important to understand the business that you're in, right? So
Yeah.
e-commerce is a specific type of business. It's about discovery, it's about conversion. In a case of like a B2B company that has a subscription-based product, if multiple users for that product keep running into walls, they can't find what they're looking for, they'll just unsubscribe from that software. And I've worked on software where, we've had contracts that are in the tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So too many misses on search, especially in a competitive marketplace where there's a competitor that is marketing a much better product, a string of really bad searches can be devastating to revenue in that type of context. So
Mm.
again, you really have to understand your business and then understand how does search drive value for your business, and then focus the optimization on that.
Wow. That is like a bombshell to drop on. So thank you so much, Tito, for coming on and sharing your expertise with us. Thank you all for listening, and make sure to stay tuned as we're going to be featuring a ton more product leaders in the search space and talking more about how to build a great site search. So thanks again, and we'll see you all next time.